All right, welcome to another deep dive, everybody. We're ready to sift through a mountain of research and really pull out those golden nuggets of knowledge for you. And this time, we're focusing on you, the learner.
Yeah, and we get it. You're busy. You don't have time to wade through endless pages of text. So we're doing the heavy lifting, cutting to the chase, bringing you the insights that truly matter.
And that's what we're all about here, right?
Uh-uh.
Giving you a clear understanding of a complex topic in a way that's both engaging and efficient.
Absolutely. And today, we're tackling how we learn. Our main source, Phil Race's The Lecturer's Toolkit. Now, the title might make you think it's just for teachers.
Right, definitely geared towards those in the education world.
But trust me, this book is packed with evidence-based insights about the learning process itself. Stuff that's super relevant for anyone who wants to learn more effectively, period.
Okay, so what's the game plan for this deep dive?
Okay, so first things first, we're going to unpack the fundamental ingredients of successful learning. What actually makes learning stick.
Gotcha, the nitty-gritty of how we learn.
Right. Then we're going to shine a light on those pesky obstacles that can get in the way of truly grasping new information. Stuff that can trip up both learners and, believe it or not, teachers too.
I can definitely see how that happens.
And lastly, we'll explore some practical strategies, some actionable tips to really boost your learning game. Whether you're hitting the books or just trying to pick up a new skill, we've got you covered.
Love it. No more struggling in the dark.
Exactly.
Okay, let's kick things off with the fundamentals of how learning actually happens.
Okay, so Race, he's observed countless learners and teachers over the years, and he's developed this really interesting model. He calls it the ripples on a pond model.
Ripples on a pond. Okay, I'm intrigued.
Yeah, and it's not meant to be some super rigid scientific law, but it's a great way to visualize how different learning factors kind of interact and influence each other. Imagine tossing a stone into a still pond.
Right, those ripples spreading out.
Exactly. And those ripples, they all affect each other. They overlap. They create this intricate pattern. That's how these learning factors work, too.
That's a really cool analogy.
Yeah, and from this model, Race has identified 7 key factors that drive learner-centered learning. Let's dive into some of the most important ones.
Okay, sounds good. Hit me.
First up, we've got wanting to learn. Seems obvious, right?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of have to want to learn to learn.
Right. But Race really emphasizes that wanting goes beyond just the clinical term motivation. It's about tapping into that inherent human drive, the genuine desire, the emotions that fuel true learning.
I see. So it was more about that personal connection to the learning.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And that desire, that want, it acts as this powerful engine. But let's be real, that engine doesn't always fire up on its own, does it?
No, not always. Sometimes it sputters.
Exactly. A tough subject, a bad experience with a teacher, a boring learning environment, these things can really put a damper on that initial spark of interest.
That makes sense. So how do we rekindle that want?
Well, engaging teachers definitely play a huge role. But you can also be proactive. Try reframing challenging topics to connect with your existing interests. Say you're slogging through a history period you find boring.
Yeah, been there.
See if you can find a link to something you already care about, something happening in the world today. How did that historical period shape current events? You might just uncover a surprising connection that reignites your curiosity.
That's a cool way to look at it. I like that.
And the next big factor Rice highlights is doing, or, as he puts it, learning by doing.
Makes sense to me. It's not just about passively absorbing information.
Yeah.
Right. Got to get your hands dirty.
Exactly. He links this back to how we learn as little kids through play, experimentation, just having a go at things. Think about learning to ride a bike. You can read all the manuals in the world, but the real understanding comes from those wobbly attempts, the falls, and ultimately the thrill of finding your balance.
Ah, the good old trial and error approach.
Yep. Learning from our mistakes. It's so natural. But, formal education, especially the way we're often assessed, it doesn't always embrace this approach.
Right. It can sometimes feel like there's a huge emphasis on getting everything perfect on the first try.
Right. And that fear of failure, that can really stifle that natural inclination to experiment and, well, mess up a little bit. So how can you bring back some of that trial and error into your learning now?
I guess create opportunities for some low-stakes practice, take quizzes, try solving problems before looking at the answers, embrace those wobbly attempts.
Exactly. And don't be afraid of making mistakes. They're often the best teachers.
Okay, so we've got wanting and doing covered. What's next?
Next up, we've got feedback. Both the positive kind, the you're on the right track kind of feedback, and the constructive criticism, the here's where you could improve feedback.
Yeah, feedback is essential in any learning process, right? You need to know what you're doing well and what you need to work on.
Absolutely. But Race, he emphasizes that it's not just about receiving feedback, it's about how you process it. He even suggests training ourselves to welcome and thank people for critical feedback.
That's interesting. See it as a chance to grow, not as a personal attack.
Right. So instead of getting defensive, you view it as valuable information that can help you improve. Think about it like this. If someone is taking the time to give you constructive feedback, they obviously see potential in you. They want to help you get better. And one method that can be super helpful here is something called coded feedback.
Coded feedback. I've not heard of that one.
Yeah, so instead of writing out full sentences, the instructor uses a key of common errors. It's more efficient, and once you get the hang of the code, you can actually start identifying patterns in your own mistakes, which is really powerful.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. It's like learning a new language, the language of your mistakes.
Exactly.
Okay, on to the next key ingredient for successful learning.
All right, next we have making sense of what you've learned. Race calls this digesting or getting your head around it. And it goes way beyond just remembering the information. It's about truly understanding it, making it your own.
Right. Internalizing it so you can explain it in your own words.
Exactly. Race argues that if you can explain an idea clearly to someone else, you've truly learned it.
So it's not enough to just parrot back what you've read or heard. You have to be able to break it down and communicate it in a way that makes sense to others.
Precisely. It forces you to organize your thoughts and really nail down the core concepts. And to help with this digesting process, Race recommends some self-questioning techniques after learning something new.
Okay, so like quizzing yourself on the material.
Yeah, but more than just basic recall. Ask yourself things like, what are the key takeaways here? How does this connect with what I already know? And the real test, can I explain this to someone who knows nothing about it?
That's a good one. If you can teach it, you truly know it.
Right.
Which brings us to verbalizing. Right. Actually putting that learning into spoken words.
Absolutely. Teaching, explaining, coaching, all these things solidify your own understanding. Race even references Professor David Sadler's work, which suggests that true learning deepens when you're not just recalling information, but actively making judgments about it and, you guessed it, verbalizing those judgments.
So it's about evaluating what you're learning, not just blindly accepting it.
Exactly. And to really cap into this, ask yourself questions like, is this information accurate? Is it relevant to my goals? Is there a better way to approach this?
I like it. It forces you to think critically about what you're learning.
It does. And then finally, there's the idea of learning outcomes. Race frames these as clear targets for students, so they know exactly what they need to achieve by the end of a learning experience.
Right. So it's like a roadmap for the learning journey.
Precisely. And he stresses the connection between those learning outcomes and the criteria used for assessment. It makes you wonder how often learners actually sit down and really understand those outcomes before diving into a course or a new subject.
That's a good point. It's easy to just jump in without really considering what you're aiming for.
And by actively engaging with learning outcomes from the start, you set yourself up for success because you know exactly what you're working towards and how your progress will be measured. It takes the guesswork out of the equation.
Makes sense.
And Race wraps up this section with a reminder that learning, at its core, is a human activity. It's not confined to classrooms or textbooks.
Right. Can happen anywhere, anytime.
Those core processes of wanting, doing, feedback, making sense, verbalizing, they're universal. Whether you're learning a new language, a musical instrument, or just trying to figure out how to fix something around the house, those principles are at play.
Love that.
Okay, so we've explored these fundamental mechanisms of learning. Now let's switch gears a bit and talk about some of the common roadblocks. Those things that can really kill that initial spark of excitement to learn.
Yeah, let's talk about the motivation killers. What does Ray say about that?
Well, he pinpoints a few key factors. One is learners feeling undervalued, like maybe they're cruising through the material while others are struggling and all the attention goes to those who are behind. This can make advanced learners feel ignored, even bored.
Right. It's like they're not being challenged enough.
Exactly. And then there's the human need for a sense of achievement, for experiencing some wins along the way. If learners constantly feel like they're failing or not making progress, that motivation tank is going to run dry pretty quickly.
Yeah, we all need a little boost now and then. A pat on the back to keep us going.
Absolutely. So what can educators and learners themselves do to combat this motivation slump? Race has a few suggestions. One is simply remembering that learners, they have lives outside their studies. They've got their own challenges, stresses, maybe they're adjusting to a new environment.
Right, especially those first-year students.
Exactly. And recognizing this, having some empathy, can go a long way.
So remembering that everyone is coming to the table with their own unique baggage.
Precisely. And another key tactic, praise. Genuine, specific praise. Race points out that those little ticks on an assignment, yeah, they're okay, but they're not enough.
Right, I can see how that wouldn't be super motivating.
While constructive criticism is important, learners also need that positive reinforcement to fuel their efforts. Celebrate those successes, no matter how small they might seem. And I thought this was a really fascinating idea. Race proposes that maybe, just maybe, educators in higher education should themselves be enrolled as students in some academic program.
Wow, that's an interesting thought. So they'd be experiencing the whole student thing firsthand.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Walking in their students' shoes, feeling those pressures, those frustrations. Imagine how that might shift teaching practices.
I think that's a brilliant idea.
Yeah, it would definitely give educators a whole new perspective.
Okay, let's move on to assessment and feedback, two biggies in the learning world.
Absolutely. Race is very clear about this. Assessment has a huge influence on how and what students learn. If it's being assessed, learners are going to focus on it.
Makes sense. It's like what gets measured gets learned.
Right. And he raises some concerns about those traditional time-constrained written exams, the ones we've all probably sweated over at some point.
Oh yeah, I know those exams well.
He argues that in many fields, this format, it just doesn't align well with all those great learning factors we talked about earlier. Plus, even when there are seemingly clear right and wrong answers, creating a truly fair and reliable exam, it's harder than it looks.
Because there are so many factors at play, right? Like how someone handles pressure, how quickly they can write.
Exactly. And those things, they might not accurately reflect a student's actual understanding of the material.
So what does Ray suggest we do about this?
He's a big advocate for mixing things up, using a variety of assessment methods, to give everyone a fair shot at showcasing what they know.
Right, because different people shine in different ways. Some might excel in written exams, while others might be better at presentations or practical demonstrations.
Exactly. And he actually explores some alternative assessment formats in more detail later in the book. He also touches on strategies for making those traditional exams a bit more reliable when it comes to grading.
Oh, I'd be curious to hear those.
Yeah, we'll definitely get into that later.
Okay, sounds good.
He also brings up a really interesting concept, unconscious incompetence. This is where learners literally aren't even aware of the things they don't know how to do.
Oh, that's a tricky one. How do you even address something you don't know you're missing?
Well, that's where clear learning outcomes and good feedback come in. They help pull learners out of that danger zone, make them aware of their knowledge gaps so they can start filling them in.
Right, it's like shining a light on those blind spots.
Precisely. And there's a growing trend towards learners taking more responsibility for their own assessment and feedback. This includes learning how to evaluate their own work and the work of their peers.
So it's about developing those self-reflection and critical thinking skills.
Exactly. And becoming more active participants in the whole learning process.
I like that, taking ownership.
Right. Now, when it comes to feedback, timeliness is key. Race points out that feedback delivered late often just gets ignored. It's no longer relevant to the learner's needs.
Because they've already moved on mentally.
Exactly. And there are lots of different feedback methods. We've got electronic feedback, model answers, coded feedback, which we talked about earlier, face-to-face conversations, even peer assessment. Each has its pros and cons, of course.
So the best approach depends on the situation.
Right. And peer assessment, he argues, it's a great way to increase the amount of feedback learners receive and make the whole assessment process more transparent. Plus, self-assessment, he says, is a really valuable learning experience in itself, encouraging students to think about their own thinking.
It's like learning how to learn.
Exactly. Metacognition.
Okay, now for a topic that's definitely relevant to our times, what about the role of lectures in this digital age? I mean, information is everywhere now.
Right. It's a question a lot of people are asking. With all this information online, what's the point of traditional lectures anymore?
Exactly.
Well, Race acknowledges this debate. He suggests that the role of the lecturer, it's shifting. It's less about being the sole source of knowledge and more about guiding students through this vast ocean of online information, helping them find, evaluate, and use the best resources.
So becoming more of a curator, a guide.
Precisely. But he also argues that those large group sessions can still be really valuable.
Yeah, I can see that.
Think about things like collaborative problem solving, getting instant feedback from a large group, or just having learners verbalize their ideas to a wider audience.
Right. There's a certain energy that comes from being in a room full of people all engaged in the same topic.
Exactly. In Race, he offers some practical tips for making lectures more effective in this digital age. Things like clear structure, engaging visuals, incorporating interactive elements, and always having a backup plan for those inevitable tech glitches.
Always have a plan B when it comes to technology.
Oh, absolutely.
And then we've got resource-based learning, which is becoming more and more common. MOSCs, podcasts, all those online goodies, as well as traditional print materials.
Right, and Race dives into how to adapt existing resources and create new ones that are really effective. He emphasizes clarity, breaking things down into manageable chunks, building in opportunities for self-assessment with feedback, and making sure everything aligns with those learning outcomes we talked about.
Makes sense. It's about making those resources as learner-friendly as possible.
Exactly, and he also considers what types of material are particularly well-suited for resource-based learning. Things like remedial content for those who need extra support, or topics that students often find difficult at first.
So giving them the tools to work through those challenges at their own pace.
Precisely. And he briefly touches on online assessment and virtual learning environments, too, which are becoming increasingly important.
It's a whole new world of learning out there.
It is.
Okay, let's shift gears again and talk about learning in smaller groups. Things like seminars, tutorials, or even those informal study groups.
Ah, yes, the power of small group learning. Race highlights how much deep, meaningful learning happens in these more intimate settings.
Right, you get that chance for more interaction, more discussion, and you learn from each other's perspectives.
Exactly. And he mentions a bunch of ways to structure these groups and encourage everyone to participate. Going around the group for individual contributions, brainstorming sessions, even something called a fishbowl discussion.
A fishbowl, how does that work?
So a small group has a discussion in the fishbowl while the others observe and provide feedback afterwards.
Oh, interesting. So you get to see different communication styles and problem-solving approaches in action.
Precisely. And he touches on the importance of followership skills in group work. Sometimes it's more important to listen and support than to always be the one leading the charge.
Right, knowing when to step back.
Exactly. And how to handle situations when there's a dominant personality in the group. Those folks who tend to take over.
Yeah, we've all been in groups with those folks.
Right. And Race, he also points out some facilitator behaviors that can actually hinder group work, which I thought was really interesting. And he offers some tips for icebreaker activities, ways to start those sessions off on a positive note.
Icebreakers love those. They can really help break the tension and get people talking.
Absolutely. And he acknowledges that some level of conflict in group work is normal, even healthy. The key is to acknowledge it, establish some ground rules for how to handle those disagreements, and move forward constructively.
So it's about turning that potential tension into a learning opportunity.
Exactly.
Okay, as we wrap up our deep dive, let's touch on some of the broader challenges in education today. Race briefly discusses originality and authenticity in student work. That age-old question of, is anything truly original?
Right. And he makes a good point. True, groundbreaking originality is pretty rare. More often, it's about how effectively learners can apply their knowledge to real-world problems to create something new and useful.
So it's about building on what's come before and making it relevant to the world we live in.
Exactly. And of course, there's the constant challenge of plagiarism in this digital age. Information is so readily available, it's easier than ever to copy and paste. So Race emphasizes the importance of designing assessments that discourage cheating.
Right, making it harder to simply lift someone else's work.
Precisely. And this ties into the bigger shift towards student-centered learning that we've been talking about. It's crucial for educators to understand their students' individual needs and perspectives and create learning experiences that truly resonate with them.
So meeting them where they are, not just trying to force them into a one-size-fits-all mold.
Exactly. And we can't forget about inclusivity. Creating learning environments and assessment methods that are fair and accessible to all learners, including those with disabilities.
Absolutely. Equal opportunities for everyone.
Right. And he touches on the increasing diversity of student backgrounds and the need for more flexible teaching approaches that can support everyone. And he briefly mentions cross-cultural capability. With today's globalized world, it's more important than ever to understand and respect different cultures, especially when you have international students coming from different academic systems.
Right, making sure everyone feels welcomed and understood.
Precisely.
Okay, last but not least, let's talk about professional development for educators. Race is a big believer in ongoing learning, not just for students, but for teachers too.
Absolutely. He stresses the importance of seeking feedback on their teaching practices from both students and colleagues, and being involved with professional organizations that promote good teaching methodologies.
So it's about staying current, being open to new ideas, and constantly striving to improve.
Exactly. And he also highlights the value of reflecting on your own teaching through things like observing other teachers, analyzing student feedback, taking a critical look at your teaching materials.
It's like teaching is a continuous learning process.
It definitely is. And he reminds us that self-care is crucial. Teaching is a demanding profession, and it's easy to get burned out. So taking time to recharge and manage stress is essential.
It's like they say, you can't pour from an empty cup.
Exactly. And he touches on things like appraisal processes as opportunities for growth and using questionnaires and student feedback to get a sense of how you're doing.
So gathering data, looking for patterns, and always aiming to do better.
Precisely.
Well, that was quite a deep dive into how students learn effectively. Lots to think about. Big thanks to Phil Race for all his insights.
Yes, so many great takeaways. And remember, those key elements we discussed, wanting, doing, feedback, making sense, and verbalizing, they're not just for students. They're applicable to any learning situation.
Exactly. Whether you're learning a new skill, tackling a new subject, or just trying to understand something better.
Right. And here's a final thought to leave you with. Think about one area where you're currently learning something new, or maybe a situation where you often find yourself explaining things to others. Which of those factors we discussed are most present? Which ones might be missing?
And what's one small change you could make based on all these insights to make that learning process more effective for yourself or for those you're guiding?
Yeah, how can you apply these principles to your own unique learning landscape? We encourage you to keep exploring these ideas and see how they can make you a more effective, more engaged, and more fulfilled learner.
And on that note, thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We'll see you next time.
See you then.